Please listen carefully.
Hello everyone, welcome to the 13th episode of the Study Space podcast, a show dedicated to helping students like you earn better grades, navigate your college journey, and become lifelong learners. My name is David, content strategist at Uniplan.
And my name is Julian, the founder and lead software engineer at Uniplan.
Today we'll be talking about our opinions on legacy admissions and what they mean in the college application process. But before we start, I have to ask, Julian, what's inspiring you today?
What is inspiring me today is a book series that I recently finished reading. It's a fantasy novel. I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before. It's called Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. And I don't know if I actually mentioned it as like an inspiration before, actually. I don't remember that. But if I did, then I apologize. But it's my inspiration again because it's a really, really good book series. The reason why I like it, like the primary reason why I like it is the magic system. It's very restrictive. There are a lot of rules and a lot of properties to the magic system that sort of restrict the user. So that makes the scenarios a lot more interesting, and the problems that the main characters solve with their powers, since there are limitations on their powers, is also interesting, right? There are very few moments where it's like, oh, this person is very overpowered and they just wave their hands with their magic and then all the problems are solved. Very, very, very few situations are actually like that. And that's one of the predominant reasons why I really enjoyed this book series. And I just finished the series, so there's it's a series of 3 books in the first like timeline, and then there's like a huge leap in time, and then it starts like the next like era. I just finished the first set. It's very, very good. Very, very well written. The story is very well written. There are a lot of parallels to like current events, which I really enjoy. And yeah, I mean, it's just an overall really well written fantasy novel. And that's what's inspiring me today, is that I only just recently finished reading it. And it's a book series that, like, I haven't read like a good fantasy novel in a very long time. Like, I usually read nonfiction, and this is the first time where I've really dedicated some time, a significant amount of time, reading fantasy. And I'm actually really glad that I did, because it's really, really good.
All right, well, I guess what's inspiring me today is actually something that happened last week, was that we actually had our first guest on this podcast, which I thought was really exciting. Yeah, awesome. I finally got to interview someone else besides, well, Julian's not really an interviewer, he's a host. So, but yeah, it was nice to not just have 2 hosts talking to each other, and instead have someone else bring in their own experiences. And I think Andre was a really good guest who was able to talk about. Right, yeah, like, I mean, he had a similar background to us. I mean, he grew up in Garden Grove as well. He went to
did he?
School. Yeah, he went to school very, very local. I'm not going to say the name of the school, but it's in our school district. And
oh, okay. Yeah,
and we didn't know each other before we came in, but then we ended up actually becoming pretty good friends here due to a number of reasons. Like, part of that was because I had some friends in my first year orientation group, and they introduced me to him, and he also happened to be living on my floor, which I actually don't think was a mistake. From what I've heard, there was a admissions lady who actually said that they do pair people from similar backgrounds or similar geographic locations together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just to help them get like that's like bring a piece of home along with them so they don't get really lonely. Yeah, it's really interesting. Right, yeah. I didn't hear about it before. I thought it was just a coincidence at first, but I found out later that it was actually intentional.
That would be a really wild coincidence.
Yeah, no, it would. Just the only 2 guys from our city there. That'd be really, really strange. Yeah. That's
still wild that you were able to meet somebody from our hometown at your university across the nation.
Yeah, right. And usually nobody from our school district goes to this school, which is kind of funny.
I don't think so. Yeah. Because usually our families are like, go to UCI, go to UCLA, go somewhere close, because our parents always want us to like stay at home and like
Exactly.
live at home and such like, and which is, there's a place and there a reason for that, but honestly, like, you gotta move away, you gotta live on your own for a while just to know what that's like.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah, but I had a great time interviewing Andre. He was able to talk a lot about, the challenges of being a pre-med and just like a lot of stuff about Asian culture and, growing up, with, I guess, a less fortunate background than some other people and how that impacted him. And I know I grew up with the same background as he did, so that also impacted me. And so I was able to talk a little bit about that. So I hope you guys found it interesting, but I definitely found it interesting for sure. Not just
I thought it was a good episode.
Yeah. Okay, well, I guess let's get into the episode. So today we're talking about legacy admissions. And the reason why I bring this up is because just like a few weeks ago, I believe, I saw an article which was written by the headmaster, I think, chancellor of our school, president. There you go. Yeah, President Ronald Daniels, and he wrote about it in a few places. I think the Atlantic, Washington Post, and a few others, and it was called "Why We Ended Legacy Admissions at Johns Hopkins." And I thought it was really interesting because, first of all, I'd always thought we still had the legacy admissions program. I know I was talking about it to like some USC students a while back when I was still in high school, and they were like, "Oh yeah, Johns Hopkins definitely does do legacy. It's just a very small percentage compared to schools like Harvard." So I thought that was interesting, but then I realized, like, wow, like they did it, and they did it like secretly. So they didn't want anyone to know about it for the first, few years. And I don't know if that's because of outrage or something like that, or just because they wanted to see how like the effects would actually turn out before they decided to get rid of it for good. But they definitely did see positive impacts. And so that's why they kept, they kept the program. They kept the restriction of legacy admissions, basically. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that, because I know you went to a school that I don't think had legacy admissions. You can correct me on that, but yeah. But I want to hear your experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, my experiences are basically null. Well, I didn't go to a public university, or I didn't go to a private university, I should say. So legacy admissions weren't that big of a deal. I want to mention that the entire University of California system does not consider legacy status during admissions, and so. Similarly to the University of California system, the California State University system, which is where San Jose State University operates. I know that's confusing. There's a University of California, and then there's a California State University system. Those are two separate systems, but the CSU system does not also consider legacy in their admissions. So I went to San Jose State. They didn't consider legacy during the application process. Like, it wasn't even a question, I didn't even think. Right. So that wasn't even something that you could take advantage of if you wanted to, because it wasn't even a question on the application. So they didn't even ask for that. However, during my search, I did find a handful of notable universities that explicitly do not prefer legacy students in their admissions decisions. And a couple of those include Caltech, MIT, and UC Berkeley, which, I mean, earlier I said that the entire University of California system does not prefer legacy students in their admissions decisions, but notably UC Berkeley does not. And I think it's interesting that a lot of people pointed fingers at UC Berkeley for like legacy admissions. I thought that was funny because people sometimes forget that UC Berkeley is technically a public university. I mean, it's a very good public university, but
right.
I think sometimes people forget that it's a public university because it's so renowned in education and, the kind of students that they're putting out into the world. Right. People tend to forget that it's a public university, and so then they are quick to like point fingers at UC Berkeley and like, hey, you admit legacy students and you're elitist, kind of a thing. And it's
right.
like, hello, it's public university, dude. And they don't. So the UC system does not consider legacy in their admissions decisions, which I think is great. I mean, I guess it's typical of me to think that it's good to not consider legacy in admissions decisions because I don't benefit from legacy at all. I'm a first generation college student, so my parents never went to university, never completed university. Really, the highest education that they completed was high school. And even then, the high school education was in Vietnam. It wasn't even in the United States. So yeah, my parents had no like American education at all. And so being a first generation college student, obviously legacy status doesn't really help me at all. And so I wouldn't say that I've particularly been disadvantaged by it because I applied to largely public universities. The only private universities I applied to was Stanford and Santa Clara. And I'm not sure about Santa Clara, but I'm fairly certain Stanford actually considers legacy.
Yes,
I remember
they do.
that being.
That's
I remember
correct.
that being a question on the Common App was like, "Do you have parents who went here or work here?" Kind of a thing. So,
Right. Yeah.
So Stanford is one.
Stanford definitely does do that. Yeah.
yeah, and so I mean, I didn't get into Stanford. So, but again, like I don't know if that is a result of my academic ability or my lack of legacy. I doubt it's solely because of my lack of legacy. I should hate to think that it's because of my lack of legacy status I did not get into Stanford, but who knows? I don't think so. I don't think I've been particularly disadvantaged by it in comparison to other students, nor have I been able to take advantage of it because I just straight up don't qualify for that sort of bracket.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think it has affected me at all. I mean, I did apply to a number of universities that I think do like prefer legacy admissions. So Cornell is definitely one of them because it's in the Ivy League, and the Ivy Leagues are kind of I don't want to say notorious because some might view it as like beneficial, as we'll discuss later. But some obviously it's kind of like a prominent thing in the Ivy Leagues that they do accept legacy students at a higher rate, and it's interesting. But I don't want to say that affected my admissions at all. I also applied to Duke. I don't know if it does that. I'm not entirely sure. If you want to Google that right now. I do think USC does it. I applied to USC, didn't get in there either. And Carnegie Mellon, I'm like 90% sure it didn't do it. It doesn't do it. And I know that JHU just abolished that program a few years ago. And I know that when I first got in, and even like in the first few months while I was here, they really tried to welcome me in because I'm first generation and because I'm limited income. And so that was definitely like really great experience. And it felt a lot better because I knew that there was a community around me that also, their parents didn't go to college, didn't have the privilege of going to college. And so I was the first one, and I think that was a good experience. Just for me, I know it was for other people as well who were part of the first generation limited income program. But I'm not sure, like I'm not really sure, like as you said, like how it has impacted me directly, legacy admissions, because I don't go to school with legacy admissions. So I guess I'll never know.
Yeah, I just did a quick search. So Santa Clara University does consider legacy in its admissions process. I got into Santa Clara University, so obviously not having legacy, I still got in. So that
interesting.
doesn't really mean much for Santa Clara University. But Duke University, I believe, does consider legacy. Actually, there's literally a website called alumni.duke.edu, and it says that Duke is pleased to offer advice and assistance to the children and grandchildren of Duke alumni who are considering Duke for their undergraduate education. So not only are they preferring, or not only do they have a preference, whether or not it's slight is up for debate, in their college admissions, but they also literally say here that they will offer advice and assistance to legacy students. So, that's a thing for Duke. That's whether or not that's a good thing is up for debate, but that is something that they offer. So,
right. And I just want to make a note here. Something pretty notable. I've noticed that the universities that do more technology related or kind of like, I guess, future oriented stuff, they're the ones who actually don't do legacy. I don't know if that's like a coincidence or it's correlation, but as we mentioned, California Institute of Technology, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and just recently Johns Hopkins, which is I'd say like pretty like STEM oriented, pretty engineering oriented nowadays. They also have a very large pre-med like kind of base, but it's really interesting how the more tech oriented schools are leaning towards not preferring legacy. I know Caltech's justification for it is that they want a completely meritocratic system, which means everybody that goes to Caltech is the best, right? They didn't get in for alternate like reasons. They didn't get in because their parents went there. They didn't get in because of even diversity reasons, which I think Caltech has been criticized for, but they base their admissions purely on two factors. One is academics and the other is extracurriculars. And also, I guess, essays too to go along with that. But it's completely meritocratic. I want to hear your thoughts on that. I don't know. I mean, I think my view towards Caltech's program has been slightly mixed. I mean, I think it's a good thing that, it does base like everything on merit, but at the same time, that can be kind of intimidating, I'd say. And I don't know. I want to hear your thoughts on it.
So you're saying that like universities that offer legacy preference are more intimidating than those universities that don't? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, no. I meant the other way around. The universities that base everything purely on merit are actually more intimidating, in my opinion.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Yeah, right.
See,
because then, like, yeah.
I see the opposite way. Because I look at Harvard and I look at the Ivy Leagues and
interesting.
I mean the one thing that comes to mind is like the notion of like a Harvard man or like a Cornell man or like a Princeton man, right?
Right.
Like you say these things because there's an air of legacy to them, right? Like my father was a Harvard man or my father was a Princeton man and I want to follow in his footsteps and be a Princeton man as well. And that entire notion of like being an Ivy League man scares me. I mean, I don't feel threatened by it, but I feel less inclined to apply because I'm not part of that like boys club of like, like my father went to Harvard and so therefore I must go to Harvard as well. And I don't have that. Like I don't have that I don't fit that criteria. So I feel a little less inclined to apply, which obviously like in hindsight is a ridiculous notion to have in my head because that doesn't say anything about my academic ability. And like the reality is not 100% of the students that get accepted to those schools are legacy students, and so I could have had a chance to go there, but I just chose not to apply. Right. Oh well. But the fact remains, like I still feel the way that I feel. I still feel as though I can't apply or like I shouldn't apply because I don't have that legacy connection. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that makes me feel a little. I mean, that whole notion of like Ivy League man, like. It's not threatening per se, but it is a little scarier. I feel less inclined to apply because there is that notion. Whereas with Caltech, that's like something that is supposedly entirely based off of merit and academic ability. Like that's something that I feel can be, I guess is fairer in a sense where it's not like your admissions decision is based off of the genetic lottery and it's more of like something that you have some control over, and that's your academic ability, right? And I think an admissions decision that is based off of something that the student can control is more reflective of like the merits of the school as opposed to like being based off of luck of the draw in terms of the genetic gene pool, right?
Interesting, yeah. I mean, the reason why I say it's scary is because obviously, like, there might be some, like, quote-unquote legacy students, but obviously they didn't get into Caltech because, their parents got in. They got in because they're just equally as smart as their parents. But I feel like, I don't know, that's kind of intimidating to me because that means literally I guess there's less of a sense of culture. If you would say at Caltech, everybody is just there to be like literally the best at engineering, literally the best at technology, and that's what kind of binds them together. And so I guess you wouldn't get the same like kind of welcoming culture that you would at a lot of other schools where they have established traditions and stuff. Caltech is more kind of like, okay, you're gonna go here and you're just gonna like, you know, work, like, I don't want to say anything explicit, but really, really work hard. And that's, I don't know, that's a little scary to me, but
I think that notion, I think there's some truth to that notion. Like, it's a very renowned school.
That's the word.
Like,
yeah.
it is cutthroat. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is renowned for the kind of people that it produces, right? Caltech is just like an amazing school that just churns out a lot of super duper talented engineers that go on to do amazing things with like NASA, SpaceX, and just cutting edge technology and research in every single spectrum of science and technology. And that's amazing. And I can see how that might be like scary, but the reality is that, like, you're afraid of like the lack of culture, but I think that, I mean, my university has plenty of culture and they don't have legacy admissions. And then your university, like, you've been able to meet people that you resonate with on campus, and your university doesn't take into account legacy status when they're admitting students. So I don't know if there's like any less of a culture at Caltech because of their lack of legacy status, right? I mean, legacy status doesn't really account for a lot of culture, right? I mean, really, when you think about it, if legacy status was the only variable to culture, campus culture, that's the only sort of relation that you have to anybody else. It's like, oh, well, my parents went to Caltech. Oh, your parents went to Caltech? That's cool. And then that's the extent of your relation. You know, that doesn't really, the conversation doesn't really continue on aside from that, right?
Interesting.
I think that, I mean, I don't go there. I mean, neither of us go there, so we can't say for certain.
We don't,
but
I don't think we'll ever meet anyone who goes there. There's so little students at that school. It's insane, especially as undergrads too. There's like, like 1,000. It's crazy.
Oh wow, that's tiny.
Yeah, no, it's a ridiculously small school. Like, I think it's one of the smallest school. I want to search this up. Hang on.
Didn't we have a calculus like sub for high school, and he went to Caltech?
I've never.
There was a guy. I remember there was a guy in high school. He claimed to go to Caltech, and he was subbing for Mr. Aviles in Calc.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I go to Caltech."
948
that's
students,
tiny.
Undergrads every year. So that means if you split it up into 4, that's approximately 250 for each class.
Yeah,
that's
tiny.
ridiculously insane. And here's some demographics for Caltech too. I think it has like a really, really high international student population. And get this. So something interesting is Hopkins actually abolished legacy admissions. Part of the reason why was because they wanted to boost diversity status, and I think that's actually worked. There are more first-gen students now. There are more Pell Grant eligible students, and there are more students of color, right? But here's the thing: Caltech doesn't have that, right? But they have one of the least diverse campuses, which is really, really interesting. 42%, or 42.7%, so about 43% Asian. It's about 28.6% white, and those are basically the majority. So it's like that's a pretty high number. I think that adds up to 70% Asian and white. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And then the Hispanic population is about 12%. Non-resident aliens are 9.1%, and then Black and African Americans are so small that we can't even see the percentage. I think it's 1%.
Oh wow,
that's ridiculously
tiny.
Small, right? Yeah, and it's overwhelmingly majority male as well. Although you do have to note that women actually get accepted on a higher percentage than men do, which is interesting, right? Like, they get accepted at a rate of way higher than men. I think it's like 15% for women, and it's way less for men, which is so interesting when you think about it.
But the student population remains highly skewed towards men.
Right. Yeah. That's the
Oh,
thing.
that's weird.
Because I think it's almost like a very, very, very overwhelming majority the people who apply are actually male. Women are accepted at a rate of almost 16%. Men are accepted at a rate of about 4.87%. That's a huge difference. That's triple.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's true, but I just
Yeah.
had a thought.
Mhm.
Like maybe that's a result of how many people apply, right? Like maybe
Right,
an overwhelming majority of the applicants are male.
Right,
And then
yeah.
there's only so many women applying, and then
Right.
in that small pool of women applicants, there's 16 whatever percent. And
Right,
then
yeah,
like
definitely.
since a huge pool of male applicants, like there's only so few that get accepted out of that. So that can account for the lower percentage for men being accepted onto campus. But still, interesting statistic.
Right. Yeah. No, yeah, interesting statistics all around, and it really contrasts with the diversity of JHU, which is way, way better. Like we actually have a really large student of color population, which is really interesting. So I don't know, I guess it works both ways, I guess. Even if you enact the same programs, which is in this case like abolishing legacy admissions, you can have completely different effects when it comes to diversity and when it comes to other factors, which is interesting. And I know for a fact that Caltech has a huge emphasis on STEM. I don't go here, but like they even state themselves that they want students to be like the best at STEM. And so I think that's what binds them together, right? But I don't think we have that same idea at Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins is very well-rounded, I guess, in regards to everything. Like we have really good humanities departments as well. We have a good international relations department and stuff like that. And so we encourage people of all like interests to come to the school as well, which kind of generates a way different culture than Caltech, even though we also do have, I'd say, pretty strong, STEM students, which is interesting. I don't know. I guess it's just to show you that even if you do abolish legacy admissions, where you go from there is another huge step, right? It's not just the step of abolishing legacy admissions. You have to go a step further, if you want to get the results you want, which in this case for my school was to increase diversity. But I know for a lot of schools, it's a lot different. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Caltech focuses more on just like academic
Right, pure
achievement.
academics, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they literally don't care about anything else. So like if you just are good on paper as a student academically, then you're in. And then
Right,
like
yeah.
whatever you do for the university, good for you. But like focus on your academics, like culture get thrown out the window. Like it just doesn't matter because your academic ability it goes above all. Right. Maybe that's the sort of culture that they're trying to foster as opposed to diversity. They want your brain power, not your color. Right. That doesn't really mean anything for the university. Maybe. I don't know. I don't speak for the admissions office, but that's the kind of vibe that I see.
Yeah, no, definitely. I like I said, I don't go there either, but that's also the same like atmosphere I'm getting from the school.
See, that brings up another point, though, right?
Yeah.
Is using legacy admissions to support and also to denounce diversity, right? There's this notion of like eliminating legacy admissions can increase diversity, and then there are universities that argue that, well, actually admitting legacy students adds to a certain kind of diversity. Right? Like, for example, Harvard University most notably defends its legacy preferences because it claims that having a preference to legacy students fosters another different kind of diversity. That is, mixing people with deep Harvard connections with those students that don't have those Harvard deep connections, right? Like that history of being a Harvard man. You're mixing those experiences, and therefore you're creating another kind of diversity, right? But you just said that Caltech, who has eliminated or doesn't have explicit preferences for legacy students in their admissions decisions, they're no better off in terms of diversity, right? At least in terms of like people of color. Like there's no diversity there, right? And so then there's Harvard, who claims that they have a different kind of diversity. There's a diversity of student experiences, right? There's students who grew up with Harvard in their blood, and then there's other students who don't have that connection. They're their first time Harvard students, and so that fosters a different kind of diversity. So I think that's interesting. I mean, I'd like to hear what you think about how that can foster a different kind of diversity on campus.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to understand one important point here. You don't just go to college, at least when you go to the Ivy Leagues. You don't just go to an Ivy League because you want the education. You go there for connections, right? Like, let's be realistic about this. Like, a large majority of Ivy League students end up working in finance. And you could say what you want, but I argue that finance and a business in general, I guess, is less skill oriented, at least at the beginning, and more like, I guess, I don't want to say nepotism, but it's definitely connection based, right? You have to know people. You have to know the right people. And the way you foster those, connections is you go to these schools and you have such a huge alumni network with such rich, wealthy, powerful people. And, if you go to school with their kids, right, those people's kids, you might be able to, work in one of those, fancy firms or work at a high-end career, you know what I'm saying? And that's just realistically why a lot of people go to these schools. And I definitely understand that. I don't have the same experience here because, like I said, my school is kind of STEM oriented, so we don't really need connections per se. We have, certain majors do rely more on connections. Like we have an international relations major, and a lot of those students, they try to get connections to politicians, both local and national, and this is how they do it, right? Because these politicians love coming to these schools and hiring like the most talented people to work in their campaigns and such. Right. So it's really interesting. And I think if you asked me a few years ago, I definitely would have 100% disagreed with that. But I think now, like being in college and knowing a few people that go to Ivy Leagues, I can definitely see where this makes sense. Just because it introduces people to, certain connections. Because if you just admit, first generation, but really hardworking, really talented students, there's going to be no connection network. That's just reality. Their parents are not working on Wall Street. Their parents are not owning giant corporations. Their parents, probably blue collar, working really hard to get them to college. And it's just the connections are not there. And that's the reason why a lot of people go to Ivy Leagues. And so I think if the Ivy Leagues abolished legacy admissions, they honestly would not be the Ivy Leagues anymore. They'd be something completely different. And, that's just interesting. I know my school could live without it, but the Ivy Leagues, that's like a core principle almost of the Ivy Leagues. And I don't think they'll ever get rid of that because, they're the oldest universities, they're the most prestigious, and that's really how they get their rankings,
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess there is that's a good point. Right, is that the alumni network forms a sort of connection base that adds another kind of value to going to the school in addition to the education, right?
Right,
I
definitely.
think there's a connotation of Harvard being difficult to get in, but once you're in, it's sort of like a pushover, like you're sort of it's just sort of easy, right? That's the stereotype, right? Is that you get into Harvard and then it's easy. Right. The hard part is getting in. Right. I don't know whether or not that's true. It is up for debate, but that's the stereotype that we hear about all the time. Right.
Yeah.
And so then the reality becomes if that whether or not that stereotype is true, if it is true, then the real value that you get from Harvard is the name of the university and the connections therein.
Exactly.
Right. So I can see the point to that. But again, like for me personally, who is not necessarily antisocial, but let's say socially deficient. Let's say I mean, I'm an introvert. Let's just be real. I don't go out of my way to talk to people. That's just reality for me. I don't go out of my way to talk to people. And so even if I were to step on foot onto the Harvard campus, surrounded by all these supposed connections, literally, I don't know what to do in that environment, because my mind is go to class, pay attention, get good grades, get the degree, call it a day. That's all that's going through my mind, at least in the moment, right? My mind isn't going to like, I need to talk to this individual. I need to talk to this person who is tangentially related to Tim Cook. I need to, like, I can't do that, because first of all, there's a sort of like personal pride that I have, that my success is my own success, right? I feel like, this might be dumb to say, but this is what I feel. It's that if I take advantage of somebody else's connections or somebody else's upbringing for my own success, then my success is attributed to somebody else. It's backed by somebody else's success or family or whatever they have, right? The point is that my success is no longer just mine. It's supplemented by somebody else's characteristics. And there's a personal pride I feel where I can't accept that. I can't have my success be caused by somebody else. Do you know what I mean?
Right. No, I definitely get that. Yeah.
So I feel like my achievements should be mine alone, and the merits behind finding my own success is greater than, I knew, Tim Cook's relatives. I knew Steve Jobs' relatives, and I knew these individuals, and that's how I was able to garner all of these internships and jobs and lucrative positions. Like, at the end of the day, I don't think I would really enjoy that. And so that's not to say that I'm not afraid of asking for help. I just don't, there's a line between asking for help and taking advantage of your connections to boost your own success, right? And I feel like my success should be mine. That's just my opinion.
Right, yeah, no, I definitely agree with what you said about the line. I think there are lines between everything, and there's a huge line between going to a great school that has, really smart, talented people who will boost you up, versus going to a school where people are very well connected and you use those connections. I mean, I know in my school, like, I don't really think about it, but on a daily basis, I definitely ask a lot of people for help, not just on homework, but like on, when I'm doing research or when I'm doing rocketry and stuff like that. I have really, really smart people around me who have, skills that I don't have, and so I learn a lot from them, and I teach them some stuff too that I learned in high school and just in other classes and stuff like that. And there definitely is a line between doing that, asking them for help, asking them like, hey, like, how do I build this circuit, for example? I'm an electrical engineer, so I'll use that example. Versus saying like, hey, could you like get me like into NVIDIA, that would be, completely different. But there is a point to be made here. I'm not disagreeing with you at all. But there is a point to be made that you also do have to work pretty hard, even if you do get your foot in the door through a connection. So
yeah,
a good example is McKinsey, right? McKinsey is a very large consulting firm that is very well known. Like, a lot of famous people work there. I know Pete Buttigieg most recently has gotten criticized for it or whatever, and there's a lot of politicians who have worked at McKinsey just because it pays well and it's a really good consulting job. But I know for a fact that it has a very cutthroat culture, in the sense of, like, even if you do get in, you're still going to have to work really, really hard to even stay at the company. And so if you think of it, a connection is just getting your foot into the door, making sure that, your resume is going to be reviewed by someone that you know. And sure, you might get accepted because of that over someone else, but you're still going to have to work really, really hard at the company, which is just an interesting fact, I guess. Like,
that's true.
It's not necessarily super easy. And the point about Harvard too, Harvard is known notoriously to be easy. Like, people say, if you get anything below a 3.9, you're stupid, which is obviously an exaggeration, but there is a truth to it in the sense that like the Harvard GPA is vastly higher. I don't even know what it is. I think it's like a 3.7 or something like that. Let me just.
Whoa.
Yeah. Harvard. What is the 3.63? This is from 2 years ago.
Okay.
But yeah, we believe it's about 3.65 in 2016. So yeah, about like 3.6, like just below the A minus level. That means that the average student gets about an A minus. That's kind of ridiculous, to be honest. I know at my school, I thought it was actually high when I first heard it because it used to be a lot lower. My school is 3.2 to 3.3, which is approximately a B plus average, right?
Yeah.
Now that's like you might say, well, that's pretty high too, right? But it's that's approximately like 0.4 away from 3.6, you know? So I still think it's a huge difference. And I know that in my school, a lot of people say like, oh, it's really cutthroat, which by the way is a myth, but it's definitely competitive. I'll say that for sure. I'll say that for a fact. It's competitive, and I wouldn't say that people are willing to like cheat or rip up answers. I know that used to happen. I don't think it happens anymore, but
oh, yikes.
People are definitely going to work their butt off, like just every single day. They're just going to be nonstop working. And so there's a recurring joke like, oh, like how many hours did you spend in Brody, which is our library, right? It's just, we have this really hardcore work culture, and that's seen like all throughout the school. And I know that it's not seen in other Ivy League, not other Ivy League, in other prestigious universities like the Ivy League. And so that's just an interesting point. I mean, but you do have to realize that Harvard does have really good students as well. And I'm sure that getting a 3.6, 3.7 there isn't like free either. You still have to work pretty hard for it. I just think that like if you do put in the work, you're guaranteed to have a higher GPA than if you put in the same amount of work here. Not necessarily sure if that's true because obviously the quality of students there might be higher than at my school, but from what I can tell, like kids there seem to have a much easier time. There's no like complaints about depression or mental health or stuff like that. Whereas at my school, that's definitely a huge problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't considered that like once you have those connections, you still need to put in the work. Because that's true.
Right.
Because
you do.
The connections will only get you so far. That's true. But I think you can't deny that students with the connections end up benefiting a great deal more in terms of outcome as opposed to students who don't have those connections in the first place, right?
Yeah, of course. But I mean, to get into Harvard in the first place, you have to work pretty hard. So I mean, you could argue that they already put in the work, before they even got in.
That's true. Right. So another defense that universities have for having a preference for legacy students is the fact that it's that alumni network, right? And the alumni network hopefully will mean donations to the university, right? Endowments and such like, right? Because you've got these notable, famous people graduating from the university, and hopefully one of them or a couple of them will be gracious enough to appreciate the culture of the university so much that they will grant a couple $1 million or several $100,000 to the university, right? Which is a large sum of money.
Or $1.8 billion. Michael Bloomberg donated that 2 years ago, I believe. Yeah.
To whom? To which university?
To Johns Hopkins.
Oh wow. Okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the point is that these alumni networks, like in addition to the connections, there's also a sizable donation pool, right? And for better or for worse, some of these universities depend on these donations for their budget. Like their annual budget is dependent on these donations. And so having a legacy student preference sort of adds to like a regular continuous pool of students who feel like they have a deep appreciation for the university and thus have a greater chance of increased donations to the university. And that's a defense for the side of let's keep legacy preferences in the college admissions process. However, I did a little bit of digging. There's an organization called the Students for Fair Admissions, who I think notably sued Harvard over their legacy preferences, cites multiple studies that show legacy preference does not actually result in any significant increases in the amount of donations that a university receives. And we'll link the research that I'm citing here. But they found that having legacy preference doesn't actually lead to increased donations in the first place. So I'd like to hear your opinions on the idea that legacy preferences will actually lead to a healthy donor base, and then the fact that there are some studies that show legacy preferences doesn't result in those increased donations.
Yeah, I mean, even if you showed me that even if you didn't show me that study, I think I still would have questioned really like Harvard's claim that having a kind of legacy network like increases donations. I don't think that's true at all. I mean, I'd say that as long as the person going to the school actually appreciates the school, for what it is, they're going to donate anyway. I don't think having a legacy program actually affects that at all. And so I don't think that's a really good argument. I mean, here's the thing, like the idea is that, you like the school and you're donating to it, and you're donating it to it, partly in fact because you kind of want your kids to go there, right? And it's kind of like saying, I really like this school and I know it's going to get my kid in here, so I'm going to keep donating, right? Mm-hmm. But let's say you abolish that. Let's say you abolish legacy admissions, and let's say I graduate, right? And I really like Johns Hopkins, right? Let's say I really like the research I did here, the time I spent here, the classes and everything. I'm still going to donate, right? I'm still going to donate, and if they ask me for a donation, I'm still pretty likely to give it, even if I know that my kids, won't necessarily go there, right? And I think also as a parent, you have to realize you don't want to spoil your kid, right? You don't want your kid to go to a school, not because you didn't earn it, but because like you went there yourself and you were able to get him in or her in because of legacy admissions, which I think is kind of ridiculous, right? Like I know as a parent, I would want my kid to get into wherever they, actually deserve to get into, right? That would make them feel a lot better and more proud, because there's like, even if I only went to, let's say like Cal State Long Beach, that's a school, that I really applied to on my own and I got in legitimately, I did everything and that's what I worked for, right? I would be a lot prouder of my kid for doing that than going to the school that I went to.
But that's our upbringing, though, right?
Right. Yeah. No,
like a part of that is our upbringing. It's not. Right. I mean, like I would, similarly to you, I would be proud of my kids no matter what, as long as their achievements are their own achievements and they got little to no help from me. Like I would be ashamed if I had to help my kid get into San Jose State University. Because first of all, it's a state school. It shouldn't be, enormously difficult to get into, right? Because it's the university of the home state. Like, there's a little bit of a preference, at least, to students in that state. So, you shouldn't have enormous difficulty getting in. But also, like, there's an important lesson to be taught. Like I said earlier, that to find your own success, right?
All right, yeah.
But that intuition, that sort of sentiment is I think part of our upbringing, that we didn't have that growing up. We didn't have the notion of, my father was a Harvard man, and so therefore I need to follow in his footsteps and also become a Harvard man. Because the reality is, the reality is that there are parents like that who really expect their students, or I should say their kids, to follow very closely in their footsteps. Like, since I went to Harvard, I want my kids to also go to Harvard. Since I went to Princeton, I also want my kid to go to Princeton. And there is a significant amount of pressure on some of these students from very affluent families with a history that if they don't get in, then it's like, you're a failure. Because you missed out on a chance there. Like I gave you an opportunity. I gave you a chance because of your connections, and you failed on that connection, right? And that's considered a failure, and I think that's a bad thing. But the reality is that that is the reality for some students. And we have the sentiment of like, oh, like I'll be proud of my kid no matter what. But that's a result of our upbringing. That's not really something that we grew up with. That's not a sentiment that we necessarily grew up with. So I think that sentiment would differ if our circumstances were different, you know?
That's definitely interesting. But yeah, I mean, you have to realize that, like, listen, these schools are not like 40-50% legacy, I don't think. I think last statistic I heard,
not.
Last statistic I heard was like the highest percentage was like 20%, and some go lower than that.
That sounds about right, hopefully.
Right, yeah. So you have to realize like 80 to 90% of those kids actually earned their way in, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that, I think that a lot of them would share the same background that we have, right? Maybe that 10%, you know, like who, you know, their father was a Harvard man, like maybe they have a different kind of view on it. But for those 80 to 90% of students who maybe went to, you know, college for the first time, or maybe, you know, went to Harvard for the first time, maybe their parents went to a different, you know, less prestigious college, but they went to Harvard. You know, I feel like they would feel the same way as we did, right? They really earned their way into Harvard, and they know they did because their parents weren't legacies. And so I feel like if they do donate to the university, it's because it's a good university, right? And so I think that's what, I haven't read the study, obviously. We'll have the study in the show notes, but I'm guessing that's probably a large factor as to why, like, there's still a large majority of people who are not legacy, so they don't feel, you know, that need to donate. And so that's why the donor pool, I guess, doesn't really change too much. It's only that small percentage of legacy students that's actually changing it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think the only reason why I would want to donate to my university is if I genuinely enjoyed my experience there. And like largely in the computer science department, I did enjoy my time at my university. As a whole, with the rest of the university, that remains to be that's up for question. That's up for debate. My computer science education, I think, was excellent. And so if I knew that my money would be going to a good cause in the Department of Computer Science at my university, I would donate 100% because I genuinely enjoyed my experience in computer science at my university. However, I do get emails sometimes asking for donations from just the university in general, and I'm like, I'm not really feeling super inclined to donate here because first of all, I wasn't super involved on campus. So that's my fault. I'm not saying that's the university's fault, but also, I don't think the university did enough to sort of coax me into, you know, building that campus culture and you know, giving me incentives to stay on campus later and join all of these organizations and be more active. So I think the university could have done a better job on that part. And also there's like the administrative offices. This is starting to become a rant, I know, but the administrative offices didn't make me happy and such like. And so there are numerous reasons why I wouldn't want to donate to the university in general, but that says nothing about the computer science department. So
interesting. Yeah.
I agree that the donors for a particular school would only be inclined to donate to that school because they enjoyed their time there, because it doesn't make sense to give your money to a place where you hate it, right?
Right, yeah.
Like you give your time and energy and money to organizations that you genuinely receive value from, right? Like I don't like our high school at all, but I continually give my time and energy to the Mesa Club there. Why? Because I genuinely loved the time that I spent in Mesa. And so I am fully willing to donate my time and energy and even money to Mesa as an organization because I genuinely enjoyed my time there. So that's a good point. You know, the donor bases are largely based off of students who received some value from the university and they feel like they have an obligation to give back for that reason. And I don't think for many of those students, the reason is solely because your parents went there or your grandparent went there. You know, like just because you're a legacy student doesn't necessarily immediately equate to a future donation at all by any means. So that's a good point, and I agree with that.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually feel the same way about our high school. I like the teachers. That's the thing. I like the teachers.
Oh yeah, the teachers were great. That's
yeah,
true.
and I still go back to give presentations to their classes and everything. And like you said, the Mesa Club, or the STEM Club as I call it. But yeah, I really love that club. Gave me a lot. Yeah, and I still use a lot of the knowledge I learned there in college today. But I do have to disagree with you. The administration was pretty awful there. I do have to say.
Yeah.
Not the best.
I don't really enjoy the administrative offices there.
Not the
Anyway, moving on. There's excuse me. There's another sort of defense for the side of keeping legacy preferences, and that is some say that the legacy status is only considered for academically inclined students or academically strong students that are on the tipping point between acceptance and rejection, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
I think that's a very fluffy defense. I think there is good intention behind that
Right.
justification. It's like, we will only use legacy as or in consideration for admissions in our university if the student is sort of on the tipping point between admission and rejection. Like that sounds good, but if that were the case, you would only expect to see academically strong legacy students being accepted to these universities, right? Because they're on the tipping point. It's like, your academic records are strong, but like maybe you weren't extracurricularly involved, or there's some scathing detail to your college application, or like your essay wasn't as strong or whatever, right? But your academics are strong. If that were true, you would only see academically strong students, legacy students, I should say, being accepted. But research actually shows that students of varying academic abilities enjoy legacy preferences. So
Interesting.
there
Very interesting.
really is no clear correlation between academic ability and legacy preferences, even though there are some universities who claim to only consider legacy when they're on the tipping point, and especially when their academic records are stronger than, say, other students. But the research shows that the distribution of students with varying academic abilities is equivalent. There's no correlation at all between academic ability and enjoying legacy preferences, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I think that's pretty interesting too. I think that's by far the worst argument we've heard here today.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, since there's a whole study that disproves it, I mean, I like I had said, I don't go to a school with legacy admissions. I don't know how legacy admissions works, like personally, but I know about the system itself, and this is just really really terrible that they'd be willing to admit legacy students for the sake of having legacy students, right? Because at least if you're going to admit them, admit the ones who actually did well in high school, and it's like, oh, well, you happen to be academically inclined, so we're going to admit you anyway, and maybe we'll set a slightly lower bar, right? No, but this is pretty condemning. I think this definitely shows that they definitely have ulterior motives here, and that's pretty
and
bad.
honestly,
I don't know.
No, I agree. That is pretty telling of some institutions out there.
Wow.
And that brings to light, like, we will never know what admissions is like unless we become admissions people, right? Like,
right.
We will never know what the gatekeepers are like unless or until we become gatekeepers ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Right, because a lot of these schools are very, very afraid of revealing their admissions, practices, right? Mm-hmm. And the only real data that we have is not much, to be entirely honest. I mean, it's very fluffy at best. It's like, oh, like we do this here, we do this there, and the formulas are all different across the different universities. And I guess to the defense of elite universities, the same research article also shows that legacy preferences vary greatly between schools of varying difficulties. So just because a school is has a lower acceptance rate or is harder to get into does not mean anything in terms of like legacy admissions. So like you still see the same amount of legacy preferences to those universities as like other schools where it's easier to get into. So that doesn't mean anything there. So that's, I guess, a plus for the side of elite universities still maintaining the air of legacy status and preferences for those people. But the fact remains, like, we're never going to know what admissions and the equation is like for those universities because they're very closed door about that. And we won't ever know until we become admissions officers ourselves, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, here's an interesting statistic. The average GPA at Harvard, and we think of Harvard as like, the best school, but it's also like, what's it called? It's also like a legacy school. So they have legacy admissions. Here's a funny thing. Their average SAT score is a 1510. That's pretty high, right? That's like...
out of 16?
Out of 1600. Yeah, okay. That's pretty high. That's
pretty high.
I think it's higher. That might be around the same as my school, actually. But about the same. That's like pretty high. But here's the thing. At Caltech, it's 1555. That...
Weesh.
I don't know. That's interesting. That is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, that's a 45 point difference, which is pretty big. I mean, obviously, like, if you look at it relatively, it's not like you don't think it's that big, but then you realize like, wow, 1555 is pretty high. That's like almost perfect for everything. Their math scores are pretty different. Harvard 770, Caltech 795. Reading, Harvard 740, Caltech 760. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that students at Harvard are bad or anything. Like we said, there are 80 to 90% of students there that are not legacies. But think about it. What if they abolished the legacy system entirely and only had it so it was merit-based? They might see the same scores as Caltech. Like, that's entirely possible that they're rejecting certain students who may have higher SAT scores but weren't legacies, as opposed to students who had slightly lower SAT scores who were legacies, right? And the tipping point argument obviously is like, it's kind of vague because it's like, where is the tipping point, right? That's a really subjective measure. If you see that tipping point is, a difference of 10 SAT points, okay. But if it's 50 or if it's 100, that's a pretty big difference. I don't know.
That's significant.
Right. Yeah. And it definitely shows, right? Because people think, oh, Harvard is the best school. No, it isn't. Like, it's the best ranked school. That doesn't mean it's the best school academically. And Caltech really shows, it really proves itself when it shows these scores. I mean, that's really, really high. 1555. Yeah. I think it might have been higher a few years ago, because I know our English teacher, our AP Lit teacher, pulled up a bunch of statistics from Caltech, and it might have been even higher than that. I don't know if it got lower over the years, but that's definitely really interesting. And I don't know, it shows a lot. Numbers show a lot, and I think in this case, we can clearly tell the difference between Harvard and Caltech. One school without, legacy admissions, and one school with. Caltech has a system that allows them to admit students that they believe are the absolute best. They have no preferences towards legacies, and so they don't have to worry about that. That doesn't burden their scores at all. They can just admit the best of the best, and that's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's not to say that like the SAT scores are the end all be all.
Oh, of course not. No. Yeah.
It's the only real measure that we have that's like standard across different universities.
Correct, yeah.
Because like we said earlier, we will never know the equation that universities use to admit students, right? It's very clear that the equation, if there is an equation for accepting a student or not, varies by the school. And so we have to make do with different measures that we have. And the only real measure that we have is the same across different universities is the SAT score. Right.
Correct,
So
yes.
that's telling. That's telling.
It is, yeah.
I think to close off the podcast episode, because we're nearing the we're going pretty long here, but I guess the holier than thou interpretation of all of this discussion about legacy admissions is that, and this is not the answer that I don't think anybody's looking for, but I think this about sums it up. It literally doesn't matter where you go. Like, it quite literally does not matter where you go, because if you're going to a school for the connections, and that's good for you, and you have those connections, but you still need to put in the work, right? We said that earlier. Like, even if you have great connections, you still need to put in the work.
Right.
You go to a school with no connections at all, or you're the kind of person like me who doesn't like to talk to other people on a daily basis, and you'd rather keep to yourself, then you still need to put in the hard work, right? So on either side, you need to put in the hard work. So I feel like as long as you put in the hard work, the effort, the time, the energy, you have that resolve, you have that gumption to make your own success at whatever or wherever school you go to, I think you'll do well for yourself. And like legacy admission status or legacy status preferences, like, to hell with that, because that doesn't matter as long as you put in the work that you feel is needed for the success that you want. And like, I realize that that's a very, again, holier than thou interpretation of our discussion here. But if you feel at all discouraged by legacy status and you feel like you're disadvantaged in any way, just know that the students who perhaps are advantaged by legacy status admissions, they still need to put in the work if they have any desire to find any form of success that they can call their own. So take that and do what you wish with the information that I've given you.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And don't think that just because you go to a school that's not, prestigious, shall we say, that doesn't mean you can't make connections. There are connections to be made everywhere, and there are some connections that may not be like McKinsey or Bain and Company or something like that, but you might have connections to somewhere else, right? You might have connections to perhaps a tech company, or you might have connections to just a small local company that you can do an internship for, right? I know I literally have neighbors, and they have kind of like an in with an HVAC company, and I didn't even go to, I didn't meet them through college. I didn't meet them through anywhere. I literally just live right next to them, right? Connections are to be found everywhere. And yeah, you may have a better chance of getting those connections, when you're in Harvard or something like that. But remember, you only need one connection. You don't need multiple. You only need to have one, and that's it. That you're set, right? And aside from connections, there are educational opportunities as well, and those are important, right? Like I said earlier, I mean, at Ivy Leagues, a lot of people don't care about the education, but at other schools, people definitely do, right? People definitely do care about the education. I get educational opportunities thrown at me left and right at Hopkins. I know that for sure, and I can't even take all of them, right? There's just so many, and I can't take all of them. You'll need one, right? And no matter what school you go to, I guarantee you 100% they will have at least one opportunity waiting for you that will be advantageous to you in the future. And so you just have to take initiative and find that one opportunity, and that's it. That's going to make the difference, going to college. And don't think that you have to go to an Ivy League university or top tier university just to do that. There's plenty of opportunities out there elsewhere at every single school you go to, and even if you don't go to school. Can I say that?
Yeah, you can.
No,
I mean,
right.
We're lifelong learners, right? You don't have to be a university student to listen to us. We're lifelong learners. And the reality is, to hell with school. If school is not for you and you prefer to learn on your own, you can still pick up skills on your own. It might not be like a straight line path like college students think they're on, because rarely any path to career success is ever a straight line, even if you go to university. So
Definitely.
you know, if you don't realize that now, you're in for a rude awakening. So like, just because you don't go to school doesn't mean your path is any less of a straight line than other students. So again, you make your own success by the actions that you take and the opportunities that you take and the opportunities that you take advantage of on your own. You still need to put in the hard work, no matter which path you choose, right? If there were an easy path, people would have found it already and everybody would have been doing it. But the reality is, there is no easy path. And if there's an easy path, it's not going to lead to the happiness that you want, right? So you need to always choose the path that is not quite the most comfortable and the one that requires you to put in a great deal of time, effort, and just energy to get through and finish, so that you find the success that you're looking for.
I think that about wraps it up. Thank you for listening to the Study Space podcast. We know that there are countless other podcasts being published every day, and you have decided to listen to ours in particular. It really means a lot to us that you're giving your time to listen to two students ramble on about school. The show notes with links and everything we mentioned in this episode for further reading and learning are on our website at uniplan.dev. If you want to show support, share the podcast or tell a friend about it. Your testimonial to your friends and family is the most helpful thing you can do for us. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. That's it for this one. We will see you next time on the Study Space podcast.